And that's when I really realized that I learned how to start failing exams. When it comes to learning about how to fail exams, there are a couple of things that you got to take into consideration, and there are key 3 points that we're actually going to cover in this video. So the biggest piece is that, to start, when I talk about failing your certifications, is that you have to understand that in expecting the best results, you should prepare for the worst. Regardless of how much you study or not, and I certainly don't want to take credit away from those that do put in quite a bit of time in studying, it is possible, if not probable, that you will not pass your exam, especially if this is your first attempt. And I have a couple of stories of my own as to how I realized how I learned to fail exams in preparing for the worst. And for me, it all started because in 2012 and 2013, I actually got my first 2 certifications, which were the Administrator and the Sales Cloud certification. And back then, there really weren't that many certifications. It was really about 5. And if I remember correctly, it was the Administrator, the Sales Cloud Consultant, the Service Cloud Consultant, the Advanced Administrator, and back in the day, you had the Force.com Developer, which was the really old school one that preceded the platforms Dev 1 and 2 that we have today. And back then, I only needed those 2 certifications to start my own consulting practice. And since I did, I really never looked back because I never really had a need or felt a desire to get more. But right around 2016, a lot more certifications started coming out in the market, and Salesforce really started introducing a vast level of different options that you could go for with regards to certifications. And they were coming out with the Pardot ones. They had all the different consultants, Community Cloud Consultant, Field Service Lightning Consultant. There were tons of new ones that were coming out now with the Platform Dev 1s and the Dev 2s. And at some point in time, I must have done around 100 implementations or so around 2016, 2017. And I decided to try to take these exams because my thought process was, remembering how the exams were so scenario-based, I felt pretty confident that I would be able to reverse engineer how a lot of these questions were put together, because anybody that's taken the exams is not only familiar with Universal Containers, the never-ending implementation company, but they're also familiar with the fact that a lot of these questions are scenario-based. So if you can picture the scenario that they're talking about, and specifically the functionalities, you can kind of reverse engineer what they're saying and understand what's capable and what's not capable in order to be able to properly answer your questions on the exam. And what became obvious for me was that I was able to quickly adapt myself, and I started getting on a roll of trying to take 1 certification exam every weekend, and I got in a very good roll. I was knocking out the Service Cloud exam, I did the Field Service Lightning certification, I did the Community Cloud Consultant certification, and I started knocking those out. And then I decided to jump on the Pardot certifications because I had some experience by doing, I think, 4 or 5 implementations at the time of Pardot. So I certainly had some knowledge, and especially Pardot to me sounded simple because from a technical perspective, Pardot is not nearly as powerful as Salesforce. There is a lot of things that you can do in Pardot, and Pardot has the ability of expanding. You can go in so many different directions with engagement studios and templates and all the things that you can do on your website. But the reality of it is that from a platform discussion, from a technical discussion, the Force.com or a Salesforce platform is much more robust and powerful than the Pardot platform really is. So for me, it sounded like those would be easier exams. And certainly I did some brushing up on the study guide, and I had managed to pass the Pardot Specialist certification, but when it came down to the Pardot Consultant certification, I started taking the exam, and I quickly realized that the exam was a lot more about things outside of the technical Pardot platform that they were inside, because there were a lot of examples in particular about best practices and understanding email policies like can spam, and also setting up domain like the CNAMEs and all of these other things that I realized that I had some knowledge of, but I wasn't super familiar with, because I understood how to establish a connector between Pardot and Salesforce and do the scoring rules and kind of proceed at it from that perspective. And in that exam, I realized that I was in a tough situation, and I took the exam, I finished the exam, I did something that a couple of people, I think most people actually, will sit down and review the questions if they have time, and then you go through the, at least for me, extremely tense process of the several next and finish buttons that you have to press, because somehow WebAssessor thinks that they must ask you 10 million questions, what it feels like, about what you liked about the exam or how would you improve the exam. And I feel it takes like 4 or 5 different clicks to actually get to your grade. And back then, it was just a pass-fail. Today, you get to know how well you did or how poorly you did, because they'll actually tell you the sections of the exam that you scored best and worst at. Whereas back then, they literally was just a word that said exam results pass or exam results fail. And after that very tense moment, I clicked and I had failed. And at that point, I had only failed one other exam before, and that was my very first attempt of the Salesforce Admin. And at that moment, there was obviously a tension release of, words I cannot say on YouTube probably, but the first thing that came to mind immediately after was to run and grab pen and paper and start taking down as many notes as I could. And that's when I really realized that I learned how to start failing exams, because I started getting into a rhythm of writing down as many key terms as while this was all fresh in my head, and it helped me prepare for the next one. So, talking about the 3 key things that you need to consider in terms of preparing for the worst, then the very first thing that you have to look at is take a moment to breathe and review your questions. And it's a little bit more intense, or it's a little bit more in depth than just saying, set yourself 10 minutes to review your questions. Yes, that is important too, but you have to learn to do that with intent. And the first thing that I recommend is a breathing exercise. So you went through this entire exam. Chances are, especially if this is your first time taking the exam, you're going to want to take a moment to breathe. Give yourself 60 seconds in how you're planning this out to just unwind, because your brain is going to be fried. And it's going to be something that you're probably going to take the time to bring yourself back together, because what you're going to want to do next is that you're going to want to review your questions, but you want to try to have as open of a mind as possible to remember as many of the key concepts that you struggled. It's not a matter of reviewing just to understand, hey, here's what I want to do a final look to see if I can get this right because I wasn't positive. It's more of I want to take a chance to review this, because if I have to take this exam again, I have the chance to go back and study these terms again. Which brings me to my second point. Have pen and paper as close as WebAssessor will allow you, because these are proctored exams and you cannot have anything close to you. But with that said, if you're going to take the exam, make sure that the closest objects to you once you're done are pen and paper, because that way, as soon as you realize that the results weren't what you were expecting, you can immediately go to pen and paper and start jotting down as much as you can while this is still fresh. Anybody that's taken a couple of exams will know that the information that's in your head just dissipates extremely quickly. So be ready with pen and paper to start taking down as much as you can, whether it's just a couple of concepts or some of the different potential answers, because you're going to want to take time to go back and review and study again. Which brings me back to my third and final point, which is be ready to retake an exam. And again, this is more in depth than what most people just say, but I highly recommend taking an exam on Saturday mornings. if you are on a 9 to 5 schedule, then what this allows you to do is that it allows you to, first, I'm a morning person. I prefer to wake up in the morning where I'm at my freshest and take an exam. I truly believe that that gives me a higher possibility of passing and performing better, because taking an exam after a long day of work or something of that nature just wouldn't work for me. But the important thing to realize is that if you take the exam on a Saturday morning and you do not pass, you have the ability to let the 24-hour window pass and be able to take the exam again on Sunday afternoon. So for me, giving myself that option is really helpful because it allows me to take the exam as fast as possible while giving myself just about a day in between so I can review all of the terms that I wanted to study and review that I took down with pen and paper. And those are crucial because if you wait a week or anything more than a week really, then you start losing the idea of what was there or what was not there. A great example of how this paid off for me was specifically on the Platform Dev 1. When I went to go take my Platform Dev 1 exam, I quickly understood that this was more in depth than what I had experienced with, mainly because I am not a developer. I have some concept of development because I worked with developers all this time. I've done several implementations that involved a lot of code, but I am not a developer. So having this rhythm of preparing myself to take an exam gave me a huge leg up when I unfortunately failed. However, because I was able to take all of these notes immediately after and I was able to set myself up to retake the exam quickly, I was able to take the 24 hours that I was given to talk to a lot of developers, people that work with me, colleagues that I know in the community, to be able to kind of go over the questions and understand what I had done wrong. And surely enough, I've been able to go back, take the exam the next day, and I was able to successfully pass. And to this day, I still attribute the reason why I was able to pass the Platform Dev 1 exam in large part in being ready to fail the exam and being ready to take the steps that follow to ensure that the next time around I have a much higher chance of passing the exam for sure. So this was an extremely useful lesson for me. Hopefully it's useful to you. I'd be curious to learn some of your tips. If you have some strategies of your own, feel free to post some comments below. If not, then like and subscribe. And until the next video, make sure to always Salesforce responsibly.